That monumental meeting between Columbus and the Taínos Indians represented a meeting of the givers and the takers, two worldviews clashing, and we're still struggling with the same issues of greed, selfishness versus love, kindness. And our worldview has always been looked down upon because we're considered weak. The Indian people have been confused ever since then. We don't know how we fit in the world. And we still don't fit in. So we're still struggling with our identity in this world right now. To this day, we're confused about who we are.
Wherever there are Indigenous peoples, there is the experience of culture loss, of identity loss, of challenges constantly to even being federally recognized in this country. If you are interested, if you have a faith community of any kind that is interested in building relationships with Indigenous people, it is so crucial to understand the 400-year journey they've already been on that contributes to trauma and genuine cultural loss, as well as environmental loss and loss of diversity.
I'm an Episcopal priest. I can still go to a convention or a clergy conference or a meeting with other clergy. I still get the deer in the headlights look when I ask them about the doctrine of discovery. It's still something very far removed from the focus. And it's really sad that we have come to a place where we are actually making recognition of the doctrine of discovery, but we're not opening ourselves up to an interpretation that people who live closer to the land can bring to the way that we worship the God of all.
The stories of the lives of Indigenous people need to be told, and they need to be heard by the church and the world. During the pandemic, we had the opportunity to interview several Indigenous Episcopalians, clergy and lay, about their lives and about how they continue to be impacted by the doctrine of discovery.
It is painful for us to talk about and hear the history of the doctrine of discovery, but it's even more so in my mind painful because it seems to be referred to as a past problem. And I venture to say that even though for us the Episcopal Church repudiated the doctrine of discovery, I think it was seen as a one and done issue. And it certainly didn't have any ground that needed to be worked on to listen to what were the reasons for us to repudiate the doctrine of discovery.
Every time I get into a conversation about the doctrine of discovery, it hurts my heart because the church I love not only historically participated in it, but in its own ways, known and maybe unknown, it still does. I mean, wow, it only took 9 years after repudiating the doctrine of discovery to decide that they needed to train clergy about what that is.
I've always been inquisitive about why things happen and discovered that the research that was done on the Holocaust survivors, which discovered trauma. The trauma, a lot of those survivors suffered from trauma, and the symptoms, the manifestations were addictions, dysfunctional family, violence, all kinds of things that were identical to what I suffered in my family and what our people in general suffer.
Many ways to understand genocide, and again, the UN has defined that term in such a clear way to also refer to the slow impact over generations and of gradually taking away the opportunity for Indigenous cultures to continue their identity across generations, to teach the next generation about Indigenous life ways and food ways, and how to live on the land in ways that are sustainable. And we have Indigenous communities that are really, truly on the brink of extinction that is concurrent with species extinction. In the Pacific Northwest, that looks like the ongoing efforts and struggles to preserve salmon and the rights to waterways for traditional tribal use, because that's connected to the generational gifting of identity, of cultural ways, of language that expresses the reality of Indigenous worldview, and hunting, and all of it is so interconnected that it is impossible to just take one issue and look at it without looking at it within the context of Indigenous experience.
I had a wonderful extended family on both sides of my family, my mother's side, my father's side, and wonderful aunts and uncles, wonderful experiences. But we also have suffered from trauma. I think it was mainly intergenerational trauma. My father, he drank, for the most part socially, but during the holidays he would overdo it, and we would have some conflict in the home. And over time, my folks started having marital problems. And by the time I was in high school, they were separated and divorced. I lost my mom. She was so distraught. She took her life, and so I was really struggling myself with my own identity, self-esteem. I learned that there was bipolar disease in my family, and that it shows up in certain people. And I think my mother suffered from it. Eventually, one of my sons suffered from it, and he suffered an overdose in 2007. Another tragedy. My wife and I divorced. We had problems. I was drinking at the time.
My 18-year-old daughter was a victim of a drive-by shooting in Los Angeles. And when I went to the hospital, she was just lying very silently. And he said, she'll never come out of this. The doctor said, she'll never come out of this. She's brain dead. And so I had special ceremonies for her, and I was crying. I held her hand, and I said, Sister, I don't want to see you like this. But if you have to go, I understand. And she squeezed my hand. To me, that was her answer of, I've got to go. I'll see you in time, though. My son, he was a victim of a chokehold in California that was committed by a police officer. I won that case twice by jury trial, and the last time it went to the state. They offered me a large amount of money, and I refused it because I felt like this isn't going to bring him back. And it's so hurtful to think that I exchanged money for my son, so I never did. But if it wasn't for my faith, I'm not sure how I would have come through it.
I've had two sisters die. My youngest sister, Beverly, died in 2016. She had an enlarged heart. She never knew about it. She worked in Minneapolis for a catering company, and she went and took a bathroom break and never came back. And they went in, they checked on her, and by then she was gone. Her heart just stopped. And then my sister Karen, next to me in age, died December of 2020. The coronavirus got her. So I don't much like the coronavirus. I don't think anybody does. But in between there, I had two sons, Larry and Calvin Peacock. They died together in a car accident in 1994. a month after my youngest brother died. And most recently, last year, my husband Dean died April 9th of 2020. Thinking about my life and the people who have died within my family, I'm still blessed. I think God has taken care of me. After my sons died, I was angry with God. And I quit going to church for 9 years. I never stopped praying. I still believed in prayer. I believed in God. But it took me 9 years to keep praying, and God never gave up on me. That He was there, brought me through, and He still does.
I grew up in a small village in Alaska. When I was a young teenager, I was sent to a boarding school, hundreds of miles from my home. I remember it took 4 different airplanes for me to get from my home to this small island far, far away. And what I remember most is that loneliness, missing my parents. My only contact with them was by writing letters. And then not being able to speak my native language, not being able to enjoy my traditional cultural activities such as my singing and dancing. The Episcopal Church is going and asking for survivors to tell their stories from boarding school. As you do that, remember that that individual is going to tell you a story that happened 70 years ago. It might have been traumatic for them. And if it was, then you're asking them to repeat something that they've had buried for a very long time.
Some of the kids went to Wrangell Institute in 1954, I think. They took a lot of kids out of the school. I was 15 years old, and they put them on the plane, took them to Wrangell, and they said I was too old for Wrangell. So, and so I just stayed home and cried. And the world was over for me. And when the kids went away, they put a tag on their clothing and with their name on there. Then when they got to Wrangell, they had numbers. Never ever called by their name anymore after. It's a number 57, get the mail. If you ask someone who went to boarding school and ask them what was their number, they will tell you what it was. They said in the evening you could hear the children crying, you know. And some of the older ones try to be big sister or big brother to them. And that helped a little, but not much.
My father didn't say much about his experiences in the boarding school in Pine Ridge, especially the difficult ones. Like many of our elders, he would accentuate the positive, and he would say that all in all, it was a good experience. But I remember him telling me about how after he was taken to the school to live as a young child, every night after supper he would go down to the front gate and he'd wait. Every evening, he said, I would wait for someone to come and take me home. He said he did that for about a year, and then he realized whoever he was waiting for wasn't coming.
I grew up as a Native woman with the words, boarding school, assimilation, genocide, hearing about kill the Indian, save the man. I was just healing from that. And then to hear now all this that's going on about all the grave sites, I don't know what to think. I'm angry again, all over. But this is the history of the church, and we have to go through the healing.
Boarding schools, the very reason for their existence is genocide. Kill the Indian, save the man. That we heard from the original director of the Carlisle boarding school. When a people experiences such deep cultural trauma, and that layered upon a certain intersectionality of trauma that comes from other sources as well, we tend to give it to our children and our grandchildren, and it goes on and on and on. And this historical trauma, the boarding school experience is a significant part of it.
So when we talk about boarding school truth, healing, and justice, at the Coalition, we use those words rather than truth and reconciliation. Canada had a truth commission, a truth and reconciliation commission to be exact. And we see there are still issues with relationship between those Indigenous peoples and the colonial government that has been imposed on them for centuries. What we have been hearing from survivors and descendants when they reach out to us at the Coalition, or when we go in to visit in their communities, is a lot of deep spiritual pain. And in fact, a lot of anger that is being expressed towards the church.
The Western church sort of brought Christianity. Sometimes it was a tool for oppression. And even if it wasn't, they didn't think of our own, how we would adopt it into our own culture and what that would look like. And instead they sort of pushed on this white Jesus for all of us. And they didn't think about giving us a Jesus that looked like us. Or if we expressed that, they didn't like that, right? But if you see in Paul's letters, Paul's writing to all sorts of people. The Roman view of what things look like was different than the Jewish people who became Christian and what their faith looked like. And somehow we had to figure out how to operate together. And I don't think we ever did that with Indian people, or at least it's been viewed very skeptically. And I think part of that comes from this horrible way that people only see themselves as guardians of the faith, thinking they have to protect it from some mysterious thing that's going to make it go bad, versus like, how are we open and thinking about being in right relationship with folks?
When I got to seminary in 1995, there was an event. Maybe it was a bishop's gathering or something out west, and the reports that I heard talking in the coffee room at seminary early in was these disgusted people who were upset because they had Native American shamans bless the altar. I felt like an outsider coming in anyway, and this even made me feel more so like I did not need to be known. This wasn't 70 years ago. This was 26 years ago in this church, in a seminary. My thoughts are that the way we are going to change is not by policy, it's by heart.
First, I think it's terribly ironic that the values and beliefs that these schools were trying to stamp out of Indian children are now quite possibly the values that may save our planet today. I'm talking about values such as gratitude, generosity, and protection of the earth. We are earth people par excellence, and that is our message today, and it's reflected in the earth. A lot of Native people are saying the earth is sick. Well, the earth is sick because we're sick, and until the earth heals, we must heal.
What I would challenge everyone to do, everyone who's here and listening today, or listening to the recording later, is to sit with some of those uncomfortable truths, the things that are really difficult to hear, and not to dismiss them or make excuses or rush to forgiveness and reconciliation, but to really listen to what people are saying and why they're angry, and to not take it personal, but to ask your questions in your personal journey about how you are still upholding those colonial systems. The church is definitely part of the spread of colonialism, the upholding of this idea of empire. And so this goes beyond just looking into your boarding school records that the Episcopals have and saying, we ran these boarding schools and, you know, these are the things that happened and we're really sorry and we really want to move forward. But to take it a step further and say, we are here to dismantle systems of white supremacy and racism. And we're going to start by acknowledging the genocidal schools that we ran.
It's also worth mentioning that within white cultural traditions, the idea of boarding school, even the most fancy, highfalutin boarding school that you think of the traditions in England and like that, a lot of the philosophy is still the same. We want to break down the student and then reform them. And maybe that's culturally acceptable in certain white cultures, but in indigenous cultures, that's unthinkable. We can't imagine. The absolute worst thing to do is to remove someone from their family. Now, the great-great-grandchildren, and even more greats, as they carry the weight from their ancestors, they're experiencing their own traumas. That's a lot to carry. We owe it to them to expose our hearts and to begin to heal, and to let the sunshine and the fresh air into our hearts to heal, and to heal the pain of our ancestors. This is how we begin to heal historical trauma. The idea of dying alone is so unthinkable to us. The idea of a child having to die alone is even more so. So the idea of bringing these children home really must be part of this discussion. Whenever possible, we must do that, both for the sake of the souls of those children who may or may not have crossed over, but for the sake of the souls of the survivors and the descendants. This is imperative. So regardless of what discussions on reparations will come, and they will come and they must come, this has to be a part of it.
"30 years ago, I had to go through the process of getting sober. I had alcohol abuse issues. I'm an alcoholic. And one of the pieces of the work that I really found successful was digging into that heritage and studying some of the more traditional ways of seeing the world. I did a vision quest with a Cherokee guide out in the Big Bend, and had a powerful experience out there. Something that just really set me in a place of understanding me. That experience gave me what I have to be an Episcopal priest. That experience was my experience of seeing Creator's vision for my life.
My life changed, our lives changed, and sometimes it wasn't always for the good. And so I realized that in 1973 that I must change my life. And thank God for the elders who had their spirituality with them. And with even the church, they made sure that was a priority. And so I started going back to church, and I thought I'm just going to help out, like clean up the church and stuff like that. Well, through working for the church, I became stronger in my own beliefs and spirituality. My spirits got stronger. I went to a church one day. They had a revival in Minto, and something happened. It just turned my life around. And we had it in the Episcopal Church. And Luke was away. I think he was downriver somewhere. Came back, and I asked him if he heard what happened to me. And he said yes. And I didn't understand what was going on, but his explanation I'll never ever forget. And so it just opened my eyes to Christianity, or began to believe stronger in my heart and in my mind. One day he said, Anna, they're ordaining women in the church. Would you like to be ordained? And I never even thought of women ordination. I just said, yeah, I guess, I don't know. And so I decided to become a priest.
My boys died in 1994. I went back to church, and I started working with Father Conrad Cecil. And I started doing some lay reading, just reading on Sunday mornings, the Old Testament and New Testament, and sometimes the Psalms for him. And it just got more interesting, and I thought, I think I'd like to do a little bit more with Father Cecil or a priest and help out more. I felt joy in being able to do something. And I think the pain that I had from my son's dying hasn't gone away, but it's lessened. And kind of skipping ahead a bit, probably the greatest challenge I had after I became a priest was Easter, the first Easter, and after that. My sons died on Easter Sunday in 1994. And so after I became a priest and I had to celebrate, I guess that's not the good choice of words, had to celebrate. When I celebrated Easter Sunday, the first time I was going to celebrate Easter Sunday, I started Ash Wednesday praying for God's strength, to give me the strength to make it through that first Easter that I celebrated with the people, the four churches, because that was the morning my sons died. And God helped me. I made it through. And after that, it just became a ritual. I would start praying Ash Wednesday. And then by the time Easter Sunday came, I could celebrate with people the resurrection. And it was joyous then. But so that was probably my greatest challenge, was being able to celebrate Easter Sunday with my congregations, since my sons died on Easter Sunday. But after a while, it became, what a day, what a glorious day for them to go.
We were always told by the old people that this is a spiritual world, first and foremost. And it just happens to be operating in a physical world. But it does not always come forth. You can't see the happenings of the spirit world. But it is happening. It is part of this world. It's an integral part of this world. You have to stay open to understand and see that, make that connection. And when you do, oh boy, God the Father, Jesus Christ becomes real in so many ways, and prayers become powerful. What makes a prayer powerful is the faith behind it. And the old people knew that.
The thing that brings me the most joy is when I'm standing out in the middle of creation, recognizing that there is so much more going on than my head can even hold. There is so much relationship. And, all of a sudden, the problems I have, the struggles I have, that sort of thing, don't feel so insurmountable.
We had a Sundance chief, Jensen Jack. He taught me so much. He used to say, you go to church Sunday, you pray. Me, I pray all day. He said, I say thank you, Tueak, in our language, Tueak, all day. Tueak, fresh air, beautiful day, Tueak, food, water. He used to talk to me that way.
The book of Genesis tells us everything we need to be and exist in this life, Creator made before Creator made us. Everything was already in place to help us. And somewhere along the way, we decided not to be grateful for that. We decided to exploit it.
Our bishop, Hayashi, gave a wonderful sermon. He asked us, he said, the opposite of love? And of course, most of us were thinking hate. He said, I know you're thinking hate. He said, but he said, think about it. When you love, you want to give. You want to share. And if you don't love, what do? And then all of a sudden I sat up, whoa, that's right. We take. We take. Instead of give, we take. We rob, we thieve. We're selfish. That's the opposite of love. Greed and selfishness.
There is so much focus on this Anglican ethos. So much focus on that, and yet there is such room for learning and growth and development if we could learn to accept that there are other ways of seeing the same story that even make it more powerful.
It wasn't hard for our Native people to become Episcopalians because they were already strong spiritually. For instance, we in our Native tradition, we burn food. We burn like when someone dies and stuff like that. Then I start reading the Bible, and then I learn about the overpass when the angels came and put a blood by the door. And I thought, oh, wow. You know what? When someone dies or whatever, we put fish tail over the door. It keeps the family healthy. That was our way of believing the overpass. People don't do that too much anymore because, they learn way back then that our ways were not good, they tell us.
Our worldview has always been looked down upon because we're considered weak. Columbus's interpretation of those Taínos' kindness and love was, oh, they're weak. We can take advantage of them. They have gold, they have mineral, they have food. We can take advantage of all those things. Indian people have been confused ever since then. We don't know how we fit in the world. It's always like we've been non-fitters ever since. We still don't fit in. We don't make good businessmen, managers, or corporate leaders, because that's not our culture. That's not who we are. So we're still struggling with our identity in this world right now, to this day. We're confused about who we are. I say if we look deeply into our soul, we find out who we are, we can make a great contribution to this world.
Love to hear the rivers sing. Shoals gave voice as her waters winged. She didn't know wrong, not one little thing. To live on the land where her ancestors dreamed. It's free and happy, just a white man thing. Didn't understand shiny buttons came. Gave her a number, took away her name. What kind of soul could do such